Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it. This is no different to the mafia boss who says, those are some pretty nice legs you have. Be shame if they were broken. Right? So you better do what I say. That is what the morality of the Bible relays. We have to do what God says. We have to follow God's instructions, because if we don't, there is an infinite punishment awaiting us.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank you.
Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and don't worry, the video is about to begin. I just wanted to take a moment to make you aware of my Patreon, the link for which can be found in the description below. Sign up today for as little as £3 per month, and you can gain access to a plethora of perks and extras, including downloadable audio-only and ad-free versions of my podcast that you can listen to on the go. You can also have your question answered in a monthly video, and better still, depending on which tier you choose, you could even sit down for a Skype call with yours truly, Magic Skeptic. All that is available and much, much more. All you got to do is click the link in the description below. I hope to see you there. Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and you're all most welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. Up for today, guys, is a very important topic. And it's a topic that comes up all the time, and it's a question that I get asked all the time as an atheist. The question is atheism depressing, or is it hopeless, or devoid of any sense of meaning, right? These are important questions, not on the empirical front, and the video I'm going to respond to here even acknowledges this fact. I'm going to respond to a video by the channel known as Apologetics Squared, a very popular religious apologetics channel, and I will include the link in the description below. And as you'll hear, this video opens with this same acknowledgement. Obviously, whether or not something gives you hope has nothing to do with whether or not it is true, right? So a belief in Santa Claus gives children around the world hope every year, right? It gives them a sense of joy. It gives them a sense of worth and meaning, gives them a sense of purpose. They want to end up on the nice list as opposed to the naughty list. And you could even argue that there are some positive social consequences in terms of rule following. However, I will be quick to point out that this is an incentivized morality, and that as soon as they discovered that the Santa Claus mythology is bullshit, that you've lost your anchor, right? The people who do good things simply because of an incentive are not going to do those good things anymore when they discover that that incentive is hogwash. But in any case, I digress. The obvious point here, and I think we could all agree, is that whether or not something gives you hope is irrelevant in terms of whether or not that thing is true. But the question still matters. Just not in a factual way. If atheism has this reputation for being depressing, then I suspect that it's going to be less likely that people take it seriously and explore it and think about adopting that worldview, or at least that specific belief that there are no gods. So I want to have a conversation with you guys today about this topic. Is atheism really depressing? And in the opposite direction, this thing that gets granted by default to religion all the time, does religion really confer upon an individual a sense of hope and meaning? Does religion automatically win that competition? The anti-depression competition, if you will. Is religion by default automatically less depressing than atheism? Is religion automatically more hopeful and more meaningful and more profound? Does atheism just lose those debates and those competitions by default? I think this is a really important question, and as you can probably gather, dear listener, at this point already, I'm not necessarily convinced that these quite often default assumptions are accurate. I'm not convinced that religion automatically scores a point against atheism in the domain of hope, or in the domain of whether or not one is more depressing than another. I'm not willing to just automatically concede that ground to religion. any religion for that matter. And in order to fully elucidate my thoughts on this topic, I'm going to use this video by Apologetics Squared. The video is titled Atheism is Depressing. So, I mean, they're wearing their biases on their sleeve at the very least. So let's respond to this video, and hopefully along the way I can begin to sketch out the details that might illuminate people on how atheism can, perhaps, maybe counterintuitively, have a sense of hope and meaning that had otherwise been obscured by propaganda and mere assumption. So to that end, let's dive right in.
Hello. In this video, I wanted to shift gears. Usually, I argue that theism is true in my videos. This video is not about which worldview is true. Here, I'm simply going to be pointing out that atheism, specifically naturalistic atheism, is very, very sad.
Credit to Apologetics Squared here. In all fairness, I pointed out in the beginning of the video that whether or not something gives you a sense of hope is irrelevant, and he's acknowledging this right off the bat. So credit to Apologetics Squared here for acknowledging that at the outset, right? So this video, and my video by extension, is not about whether or not atheism is true or theism is true. What we're talking about here is whether or not atheism is depressing and whether or not it can confer upon an individual a sense of hope. With all that said and that acknowledged, let's continue.
The second law of thermodynamics teaches that the amount of usable energy in a system will always decrease. Energy will be lost by friction and overcoming air resistance and so on and so forth. Through such processes, energy will be lost into the surrounding environment, and recollecting it to use it again would be impossible without wasting even more energy. Now, the second law of thermodynamics applies to the universe as a whole. The amount of usable energy is decreasing. So, all sources of usable energy, like stars, will one day fizzle out. And any process that requires usable energy, like life itself, will one day end. So, even the possibility of love will one day be swallowed up by death.
I cannot argue with anything that he said thus far. This is just all factually correct. The second law of thermodynamics does prove exactly what he's positing here. The eventual and ultimate death of all things living in the universe. That includes any conscious creature that can experience love. So love will eventually be terminated, if you will. Exterminated. It will be vanquished. It will be annihilated. And so, yeah, that is true. But I don't think that this scores the point in favor of the depression case that he's making. Just pause here for a moment, dear listener, and reflect on the following. And I swear I mean this sincerely. Doesn't this make love even more precious? Doesn't this make love even more meaningful? Forgive me for gushing for a moment, and if this sounds cheesy and you need to vomit as a consequence of what I'm about to say, I mean, fair enough. Not everybody is able for the kind of emotion I'm about to put on the table here, but I really, genuinely, fully and wholly love my fiancée. She is my everything. And the idea that our love, the idea that that love will eventually end, and it could end today, could end tomorrow, could end 70 years from now, but the idea that that love is going to end makes me feel extraordinary feelings about how important it is right now. If, as Apologetics Squared presumably believes, our love was going to continue for infinity in an afterlife, I can't help but feel that that somehow cheapens the love that we share in the here and now. The fact that our love has a timestamp, right? The fact that it has an expiry date makes me clutch my fiancé so tightly each and every day. It makes me appreciate each and every moment because it could in fact be our last. Now, don't get me wrong, dear listener, I'm not making a ridiculous claim that I do this in each and every moment, in each and every second. I'm being, I'm speaking poetically here to some extent or another, but I am being genuine when I say that my knowledge, or at least what I believe to be knowledge, that my life is finite and that when it ends, it's over, and I'm gone forever, and the same for everybody else. That knowledge enriches my love for my fiancée. The fact that love is going to expire, not only the love between my fiancé and I, the fact that all of our lives will ultimately end, and the fact that all life in the universe will ultimately end. In my estimation, and I just don't get why people don't see eye to eye with me on this, that just makes life and love all the more precious. We value things as human beings based on rarity. We value things based on how little of that thing there is. The reason gold is more valuable than some other metals is because gold is rare. That's the reason, right? We value things based on finitude. We value things based on how little of it that there actually is. And if I only get one life, and if I only get to experience love for a short period of time, and if indeed all love is going to be extinguished in the fullness of time, doesn't that make these precious few moments of love on this earth matter exponentially more? I dare say infinitely more? I really mean it. I'm asking that question sincerely. I'm not trying to score a bogus, hippie-like, poetic, metaphorical point in favor of my position here. These are genuine questions. And to be honest, it just befuddles me that people don't see eye to eye with me on this. And having watched this video before I sat down to record this episode, you will hear the exact same befuddlement, but from the other side of the camp in this video by Apologetics Squared.
I can't understand it.
He seems completely befuddled by how any atheist doesn't see eye to eye with him in terms of how religion is more hope-filled and more awe-inspiring and more profound. So I just want to extend an olive branch here to Apologetics Squared, and perhaps there's a dialogue in the making here between us in the future. I don't know, but I think there's a real fertile conversation here between atheists and theists. I want to know why Apologetics Squared doesn't get what I'm talking about right now. I don't get how he thinks an infinite existence after we die makes his life and his love more valuable. I don't get how that is less depressing. To me, the idea that I'm going to live forever after I die, that completely reduces the poignancy of the love I feel in the here and now. It completely reduces the sense in which my life is important in the here and now. Again, just go back to Rarity. If my life is finite and it's going to end, then my one and only life is infinitely more valuable than a life that's going to be followed up by an infinity of existence in some kind of paradise. So look, I think I've said enough for you, dear listener, to be able to make up your own mind at this juncture. So let's continue.
Any work of art, any person you love, and all civilization itself will succumb to death one day or another. The universe in its entirety will one day be completely cold and completely lifeless. Now, I've heard atheists talk about how they still find happiness in life, but honestly, if it's not played to dramatic music or said with bombastic confidence to have a psychological effect on the audience, then it sounds hollow and it sounds empty, knowing that one day everything that gives you joy is going to be swallowed up.
So I was with Apologetics Squared up to this point in the video. Not to say that I was agreeing with him, but I thought that he was laying out his case in a respectful manner. I thought he was giving a fair hearing to both sides. He was just honestly relaying his perspective. But at this point, he makes, in my view, a dishonest move. And I have to call you out for this, Apologetics Squared. So you explicitly state that anybody on my side of this argument could only possibly make their case and make it sound compelling and profound if it were articulated in the presence of profound music or something of that nature. Well, I'm going to leave myself in the safekeeping of the audience. It's over to you, dear listener. Do you think that the points I made moments ago required dramatic music in the background? Was it played to dramatic music? Was it necessary for me to cue the emotional violins in order to make my point? Didn't I sound sincere? Was my point not well made? Did it land? And I'm asking these questions genuinely, by the way. If you think that my statements did in fact sound hollow in the absence of any emotional or profound music, then jump into the comments below and let me know. But I just don't agree. The points I made, I think, are fair. Now, we don't have to agree on them. My view about how atheism, or the idea that life is finite and that love will in fact eventually end everywhere, just like life, my view that actually makes love and life even more important is just my view. People don't have to agree, but that point doesn't require emotional music to be playing in the background in order to be taken seriously. So I feel like he's being unfair here. I don't think it's fair to say that the only way I could make my side of this argument is to couple it with some emotional music, and that without that, my talking points would just sound hollow. And I challenge you, Apologetics Squared, if you ever see this video, do you really think that what I've said is hollow? Do you really think that my description of my love for my fiancé, despite its finitude, do you really feel that that was a hollow description? Are you honestly telling me that when you listened to those words, that you felt that you were listening to something that was shallow, hopeless, and devoid of profundity? Because if that was your honest reaction, then I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to say. You might just be trapped in your own worldview. You might just be blinded by your biases. But, you know, let me extend an olive branch. I can see where you get your hope for in your worldview, and perhaps that's because I was once a Christian. I was once Catholic. I get why this idea that Jesus is your Lord and Savior who is going to shepherd you to the gates of heaven, I see perfectly how that gives you and confers upon your life a sense of hope. Some of my favorite stories of all time are biblical stories. Some of my favorite anecdotes and parables are biblical and religious. I'll just share one with you, because again, I want to extend this olive branch and point out to the audience that I'm not beyond seeing the hope that religion confers upon people's lives. I'll share one with you. Now, this isn't a biblical story. This doesn't come from the Bible. This comes from popular Christian culture, as far as I'm aware. If I find out the origin of this story, I will include it in the description below. There's this story of a guy walking along a beach, and Jesus is walking along beside him, kind of as an invisible presence almost. And every time his life becomes difficult, the two sets of footprints of both him and Christ reduce to one set of footprints, right? So he's walking along, and every time he encounters a struggle, the second set of footprints disappears. And this man is so disappointed by this. He cries out to Jesus in prayer, Jesus, why is it that every time I encounter struggles in my life that you leave? Why does the set of footprints reduce from 2 to 1? And Jesus' response is, no, my son, you have misunderstood. It is the times that you were struggling that I carried you. Come on. That is so moving. So the reason that the two sets of footprints reduces to one is because Jesus is carrying him. And so the one set of footprints is actually Christ's footprints. That is an incredibly moving parable. I love that. Even now as an ex-Catholic, as a devout atheist, that story gives me a lump in my throat. So believe you and me, guys. I get why religion offers people comfort. I get it. I just wish Apologetics Squared could extend an olive branch in the same way that I have. Surely, if he watches this video and listens to my love and adoration that I have articulated for my fiancé, despite its finitude, despite the fact that, yes, you're right, it's all going to end, as is all life and all love in the universe, despite all of that, and in fact, using those things as a buttress, my love and my feelings of profundity about life and all of the details that lie or reside therein. I think those facts and the finitude of existence actually make life more profound. I think they make life more precious. I think they make love and our experiences in the here and now that much more valuable. Surely, Apologetics Squared, you can extend a similar olive branch and understand how a person, not you of course, but surely you can understand how another person could derive profundity and meaning from that framework. And again, if you can't, perhaps you're just blinded by your biases, my friend. I hope that's not the case, but let's continue.
Now, at this point, the question I would be expecting from an atheist is, so what? Life sucks, but I care about truth. How I feel about things doesn't change the way reality actually is. And looking at reality, I'm not convinced that there's a God. If that's true, good for you. But I can't believe that that's the whole story for most atheists. You see, when I debate atheists, I see quite clearly that atheists really are emotionally and psychologically invested in their worldview being true. And that in and of itself is not a problem. I think we all are to some extent. But I gotta say, I really just can't imagine being invested in a worldview where love is defeated by death, rather than a worldview where death is defeated by love. It's so strange that it seems frankly bizarre. I can't understand it. That's the end of this video. Thanks for watching.
And in closing, Apologetics Squared, you're probably not alone in that feeling. The fact that you can't understand my worldview and how I could be invested in it and how it could, rather counterintuitively, give me a sense of hope despite the case that you've laid out, you're not alone in feeling that feeling, and that's precisely why I made this video. I hope you see this video, and I hope that my response gives you some sense or some flavor in terms of how an atheist could in fact have a feeling of hope and profundity despite the finitude of love and life. But I just wanted to address the specifics of what you said in your closing comments. You talk about how there's a difference between a worldview where death is defeated by love versus love being defeated by death.
But I gotta say, I really just can't imagine being invested in a worldview where love is defeated by death, rather than a worldview where death is defeated by love.
I'm not so sure that you've thought this through fully. I'm assuming here that you're a Christian, and obviously the theology will differ depending on the denomination that you are, but it's not clear to me that Christianity is a religion that teaches that death can be defeated by love. Your religion celebrates the sacrifice of Jesus Christ as though that were an effective thing to do, as though that were a loving thing to do. But that's not the case, I'm sorry. The idea that Jesus had to die for the world's sins to be forgiven is a nonsense. Let's just examine this for a moment. Sin is simply the idea of doing something that God thinks is wrong. So the sins of the world are the behaviors of people who have acted against what God recommends. Why does there have to be a human sacrifice for those sins to be forgiven? And if indeed you can come up with some interpretive acrobatics that justify why a person has to die, how could you possibly say that this is loving? Why did Jesus have to die for the world's sins to be forgiven? Those sins, again, are just the view of God that these people have done something that he doesn't agree with. Couldn't God have just forgiven the sins? Why would a human have to be tortured and killed for those sins to be forgiven? And how can you possibly say that that is love? And again, I'm granting the narrative as true for the sake of this video. Remember, dear listener, in this video, we're not talking about the truth or falsehood of the passion narrative or the resurrection that followed it. But yeah, Jesus is tortured and killed, and then he is resurrected. And what Apologetics Squared wants us to believe is that within this story, the ethic of death being defeated by love is present. But is it? I don't extract from this story the ethic that death is defeated by love. I don't get that at all. What I'm getting is that death was required unnecessarily for an arrogant God to forgive the world of its sins. That's not love. Again, God could have just forgiven the sins. That's what a loving God would have done. And if this isn't landing for you intuitionally, just break it down into your personal life. Imagine one of your loved ones expected you to physically hurt yourself, or worse still, kill yourself in order for forgiveness to take place. What? Imagine we had a court system which accepted the death penalty where a parent volunteers in place of their child. Would you say that that court system was a loving one? Would you say that that was a moral situation? So you have a child that's going to be given the death penalty because of some outrageous crime that they've committed, and then the parent comes along and says, I'll take their place, torture and kill me instead. Would this be a moral system? I mean, we could say that the parent was sacrificing for their child and that that might be loving, but I would even question that. Would it be loving for a parent to take the place of their child and to die in their place if indeed the child has committed a grave crime? Would it be loving for that person who committed the crime to be able to abscond justice and escape their responsibility? I don't happen to think that that is love. I think that that is merely enabling the wrongdoer and allowing them to abscond justice and escape responsibility for their wrongdoing. I just don't see the love in this narrative. Needless to say, in this analogy, Jesus is the parent and we, humanity, are the children who are going to be punished for our crimes, for our sins. And just in case it wasn't abundantly clear already, needless to say, God the Father is represented by the court system in this analogy. So even if we disagree on the parent front, in other words, guys, some of you, despite what I've said, despite my best efforts to explain my point of view here, some of you might still be persuaded by the idea that the parent who's willing to sacrifice themselves and take the place of their child, some of you might still be convinced that that parent is acting in a loving way. Now, I would insist that that isn't in fact true love. I would say that that is almost like a kind of tribalism. Absconding justice and helping your loved ones to escape their responsibility, in my view, isn't really a loving act. If one of my loved ones were guilty of a grave crime and I volunteered to take their place, all I would be doing, again, would be enabling their behavior and helping them to escape their responsibility. I think that's immoral. Perhaps you disagree and you just want to focus on the sacrificial act itself of the parent taking the place of the child. I guess I can see intuitionally why you might be tempted to call that love, but that would just reveal to me, dear listener, that we probably have different interpretations and definitions of what love is. But fine, let's put a pin in that. Let me concede for the sake of conversation that the parent is really loving in this scenario. So in other words, Jesus is really acting in a loving way when he takes our place on the cross. Fine. That acknowledged, what you absolutely cannot say is that God the Father is acting in a loving way in this scenario. That is beyond dispute. A courtroom or a system of justice that would allow the guilty to walk free and the innocent to take their place, that court system, that justice system is obviously in moral disarray. That is shockingly evil. In other words, this is a court system that just wants somebody to pay the price. This court system, this justice system, doesn't really care if the person who's paying the price is the guilty party, just so long as some blood is shed, in other words. And that is what God the Father accepts in the Christian narrative. When Jesus volunteers to take our place on the cross in order to allow us to walk free and abscond justice, God the Father says, yes, I will accept your torture and sacrifice in lieu of everybody else being punished. Now again, I'm conceding for the sake of argument, just for the sake of argument I might add, that Jesus is in fact doing a loving thing here by sacrificing himself. But you absolutely cannot tell me, you cannot argue, it is beyond dispute. You cannot say that God the Father is doing a loving thing here. And depending on whether or not you're a Trinitarian, God the Father and Jesus are one and the same. They're one God in three persons. So what you have is God sacrificing himself to himself in the name of a rule that he could have just suspended. If he was going to accept a human sacrifice for the sins to be forgiven, why couldn't he have just swallowed his pride and just forgiven the sins. Again, why did there have to be a sacrifice in the first place? I just don't see the ethic you're talking about. I don't see this ethic whereby death is defeated by love. Instead, I see an ethic which teaches us that death is required for forgiveness, which to me is not love. To me, that is the opposite of mercy. That is the opposite of justice. That is the opposite of moral. This is blood magic. This is a cult of human sacrifice. And so it's not obvious to me that Christianity scores a point for itself in the domain of hope, profundity, and love. What are you talking about? And let's assume he's not talking about the passion narrative. Maybe what he's talking about is how we can escape death and go to heaven because of God's love. But again, examining that, it just falls to pieces. That's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches, although it wouldn't be worded this way, but Christianity tells us that God has basically put a gun to our heads. Behave, or I'm going to send you to an eternal hell. Now, Christians differ on their interpretations of hell. Maybe hell is just annihilation. You're just dead and gone, right? Or maybe hell is a physical place of hellfire and torture. But again, this is not a framework of love. This is no different to the mafia boss who says, those are some pretty nice legs you have. Be shame if they were broken, right? So you better do what I say. That is what the morality of the Bible relays. We have to do what God says. We have to follow God's instructions, because if we don't, there is an infinite punishment awaiting us. This is not the ethic of love defeating death. Far from it. A more accurate reading is that death can be defeated by obedience. That is the true ethic of the Bible. So no, Apologetics Squared, I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you that Christianity teaches that death can be defeated by love. It's much more sinister than that. It's that death can be defeated by obedience to an all-seeing eye in the sky who calls the shots, an unalterable, unelected, divine dictator whose diktats and the following of them is going to be the ultimate arbiter in terms of whether or not I go to heaven or go to whatever interpretation of hell you may have, be it annihilation, a physical place of torture, or what have you. This is not love. Death isn't defeated by love in Christianity. Death is defeated by obedience to the psychopath in the sky. And you're right, in atheism, love is ultimately extinguished by death. But as I've argued and tried to convey in this video, that just makes love all the more valuable. It makes life all the more valuable and all the more precious. And I hope, dear listener, that I've done something to persuade you in this video. I hope that I've done something to massage your instincts in the direction of the atheistic worldview. And look, I'm not denying that atheism can lead to nihilism and a sense of hopelessness. That can happen. I'm just one atheist, and I wouldn't dare say that I'm speaking for all of us. I know many atheists personally, in fact, who are depressed by the fact that life is meaningless and that when you're dead, you're gone forever. I just don't agree with those atheists. And look, this is my channel, and all I can do is speak on my own behalf. But yeah, I've made this video in the hopes that I might change some minds. But yeah, atheism can be depressing. I don't think it is. But religion can also be depressing. And I'll close on this. It's not obvious to me that even if we accept the interpretation that Apologetics Squared has offered here, even if we accept that the ethic of Christianity is that death can be defeated by love, it just doesn't stop there, does it? Think about the theology of Christianity and the impact that it has on the world. Now, this depends on the individual, it depends on the denomination, and it depends on the country. Fine. But it's not like Christianity is all sunshine and roses. Christianity is the same religion that convicts people of thought crime. If one even looks at a woman with lust in his heart, he has committed adultery. This is an impossible standard to live by, and that impossible standard makes people feel very real guilt. It makes people feel very real misery. It makes people feel like they're not good enough. What about the people who live in conservative Christian communities who happen to be gay? They're made to feel like their nature is something that they shouldn't be proud of. They're made to feel like the fact that they're attracted to people of the same gender is wrong. Oh, but you know, we love the sinner, we just hate the sin. Oh, so it's okay to be gay, just never act on it. The amount of people who have been sexually repressed, homosexual or not, the amount of people who have been sexually repressed by Christianity because of all of its sensitivities around human sexuality. I mean, I don't have those numbers in front of me. I don't even know how one would tally them, but that's got to be millions of people all throughout the world, both contemporarily and historically. People who felt guilty about masturbating, people who feel guilty about having had premarital sex, or people who feel guilty about even having these thoughts because the Bible convicts you of thought crime. To say nothing of the actual Christian policies that have been put in places like Africa, where the Catholic Church teaches the sinfulness of contraception usage, thereby continuing the proliferation of AIDS and the increase in population in places that are ravaged by poverty. I mean, the idea that someone believes that Christianity just automatically wins in the quest for happiness, the idea that Christianity just automatically wins when we're asking what's more depressing, Christianity or atheism, or theism or atheism. All I'm saying is that atheism doesn't necessarily lead to depression, and Christianity certainly doesn't by default lead in the opposite direction. So I think I've said enough for you to be able to make up your own mind, but I'll just close by again saying to Apologetics Squared, I hope you see this video, and I hope that some of the things I've said will give you some pause for thought. I hope you will begin to realize that atheism might not be as depressing as you think it is. And again, I'm not speaking on behalf of all atheists. I can only speak on behalf of myself. And I hope that my view has done something to make you, Apologetics Squared, and whoever else has watched this video, see atheism perhaps in a slightly different light. I don't think we should be just granting by default this assumption that religion confers upon an individual more hope. Not when we live in a world where religion torments people. Not when we live in a world where there are people receiving counseling because of their fear of hell and because they fear that they're not living up to an impossible standard. I'm sorry, but I just can't take that seriously. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, drop a like on it. And if it's your first time visiting the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And while you're at it, don't forget to check the bell notification icon. That way you'll be able to stay up to date with all things on the channel, and you'll even be notified as and when my latest videos go live. I just want to extend, in closing, an extra special thank you to my patrons. You guys are amazing, and your generosity, as I've said time and time again, continues to blow me away. If you want to become a patron like those I've just mentioned, jump into the description box below and you'll find the link that'll take you to my Patreon page, and you can sign up there for as little as £3 a month, and you'll gain access to a plethora of perks, bonuses, and extras. Other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.